possible to get a deal by the end of the week. It's not that difficult to get to an agreement.
Protecting an unborn child when there's the detectable heartbeat is something that almost probably 99% of pro-lifers support.
If you're home and contemplating, just get out. It takes all of 5 minutes. You go and you vote and you make a difference because it's going to be close.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden met for a second time with congressional leaders about the debt ceiling. The leaders did not reach an agreement during the talks on Tuesday, but after the meeting, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy claimed a deal was possible by the end of the week. The Speaker and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the leaders agreed to change the scope of who is involved in staff-led discussions.
Appoint somebody from the president's team who can work with the speaker's team to see if we could come to an agreement. That is what the decision was made in this meeting. So the structure of how we negotiate has improved. So it now gives you a better opportunity. Even though we only have a few days to get it done, had we done this back 97 days ago, we'd already have a bill passed.
All came to agreement that we were going to continue discussions in the way that I believe Speaker McCarthy described, which was agreed to by all of us in the room together. And hopefully we can come to an agreement. We don't have much time, but default is just the worst alternative.
For more on this developing story, Nancy Cordes and Scott McFarland join us now. Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Great to have you both with us. So we heard from the Speaker, we heard from the Senate Majority Leader. That's what they're saying publicly. But Nancy, what are they saying privately inside the White House? What really happened inside the room today?
Well, what we have learned, Robert, and the House Speaker alluded to it in his remarks, they are completely changing the structure of these negotiations, a decision that was made because of the short time frame we're looking at to get a deal done. Up until now, you've had aides to the top 4 congressional leaders in a room with top White House aides as well. That sometimes means this is a group of 10, and that's fine if you've got weeks and weeks to come to an agreement. In this case, we have days, and there was a concern that these talks weren't moving fast enough. And so today, in that meeting, the president agreed to appoint some really high-level aides to speak directly with representatives of the House Speaker. Just those 2 factions in a room hammering this out with the understanding that whatever they come up with is probably going to be okay with the Senate Democrats and Republicans who are now being cut out, as long as it's okay with Democrats and Republicans in the House. So I've just confirmed that the president is designating the OMB director, Shalonda Young, and his senior advisor, Steve Ricchetti, 2 individuals with deep experience negotiating on Capitol Hill, with years of experience with the appropriations process, to negotiate with whoever the House Speaker designates to represent him. We haven't gotten a time for the first meeting between these new representatives as these talks move forward, but we do know, based on a new warning that we've received from the Treasury Secretary, that they've got to get this done soon if they want to get it into legislative language and pass it in the House and the Senate before the deadline.
Scott, can you bounce off that a little bit? So you have Young, Ricchetti. I mean, these are top officials inside the Biden administration. I think about Steve Ricchetti. A lot of Republican senators will tell me privately he's their point person inside the White House. So when you're talking to your sources, Scott, inside the House GOP, do they take the president's decision today to put these people forward? Is that a sign of respect? Does that mean that something can actually get done if this group's at a table together?
A lot of optimism in the past couple of hours about the fact that there's going to be a point person on the administration side meeting with a point person or 2 from the House Republican leadership side. Those are the 2 points of contact. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer a few moments ago told us he's going to take a back seat and let the White House take the lead here. It's always noteworthy when the Senate voluntarily takes a back seat. But I've noticed as this day goes along, working with my contacts and talking to senators, how noticeable it is that there's been a paradigm shift here. They have stood back or stood down from their argument that there should be no negotiations, no discussions involving the debt ceiling, and they have pivoted noticeably today to there should be no red lines in the negotiations or the discussions. This is a change. It's a noteworthy change, and it is an indication that they have, at least at this point, deferred to the House Speaker and the President to have a negotiation. It took a long time to get to this point, with very little time left for the negotiation itself.
I'm trying to understand the politics of all this, especially inside the White House, Nancy. Scott said there was a belief that they want to have a negotiation now among some on the Democratic side. Let's listen to what President Biden had to say in a video he posted on Twitter today.
America cannot default on its debt. If we're to do that, it'll be catastrophic. It would be devastating for America and, quite frankly, the whole world. It'd be a recession. We'd find that everything was changed. Our economy would really crater. It really would have a profound impact on how we live our lives.
So, Nancy, what do you make of that? Is that the president saying he needs a deal politically, he wants a deal?
I think everyone at this point acknowledges that they need a deal and that the U.S. cannot default. So that is a widely shared understanding, even as everyone wants to make the case. They're not the ones holding this up. They're being responsible. If something were to happen, they would not be the ones holding the bag. So that's the latest salvo from the President of the United States. But frankly, White House officials that I talked to, they recognize that the case that they had been trying to make for weeks, that they were not going to negotiate over the debt limit and that any talks they had about spending cuts were unrelated. I mean, it's pretty clear that that is not the case, and that they are negotiating because they have to, because the House is now controlled by Republicans. And the real question now is, what kinds of spending caps are we going to be looking at? How long are they going to last? Republicans would like them to last up to a decade. The White House wants it to be only a few years. Are we going to see new work requirements for social spending programs like food stamps and housing assistance and Medicaid and Medicare? Are the two sides going to agree to make it easier to get big energy permits, something that there's a lot of openness to on both sides, and so on. And so both sides really agree, Bob, on the contours of this agreement, of what's on the table. The question is just what those spending caps will look like. Republicans want to roll them all the way back to 2022 levels. Democrats want to shave much less off the top. So let's see where they end up. But they've got to end up there in a few days because it's a laborious process to pass this through both the House and the Senate at a time, by the way, as I'm sure Scott can speak more about, that both the House and the Senate are supposed to be out on recess for Memorial Day.
Well, they got to get this done, it seems. Scott, Nancy just talked about spending caps and also permitting for energy projects. Is there any way spending caps end up off the table in this deal and this ends up just becoming a deal about extending the debt limit and having some permitting reforms or permitting legislation on energy?
Yeah, they're really bullish on this permitting reform component. Joe Manchin told me last night that he expects it to be a part, or that it likely could be a part of whatever the final deal is here. I'll notice two different things at this moment that weren't occurring to me a few weeks ago. In the past few days, especially today, you have heard this optimism, this outward optimism. We will not default. Default is off the table. We're not going to default. For multiple parties here, that's such a change from 2011, the last time we had one of these standoffs, and it really jammed the stock market and the U.S. credit rating. By expressing this optimism, whether justified or not, the parties here might be minimizing the impact of the stock market and the economy before a final deal is done. There's something else that's really revealing itself over the past 48 hours. Who is going to vote for whatever deal comes out? People are really hedging their bets or keeping their powder dry on what they will accept, because there's going to have to be some unique composition of Democratic and Republican votes at the end of the day in the Senate and in the House. Who's going to vote for what Kevin McCarthy and President Biden agree to? There's no guarantee that has 218 in the House or 60 in the Senate.
It's going to be quite a calculation for all the leaders here. And McCarthy, the Speaker, has a lot of treacherous road ahead to make sure he keeps that narrow majority behind his speakership. We'll be following it all with Nancy and Scott on the front lines of the reporting. Thanks for being here. And a super PAC a new one, has been formed to support a potential Mike Pence White House bid. Ahead, what a Pence presidential campaign might look like and how he could compete against former President Donald Trump. You're streaming America Decides. Are you leaning in or are you leaning away from running?
Well, I'm here in Iowa, Robert.
Well, that's a tell.
Look, I love this country. And I think America's in a lot of trouble.
He's in Iowa. That's usually a tell in American politics. Welcome back to America Decides. That was part of my exchange with former Vice President Mike Pence last month. And a new super PAC has now been formed to support a potential Pence campaign committed to America, as several aides who worked for Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, Finn Gomez, and Aaron Navarro join us now. Finn is CBS News' political director. Aaron is a CBS News political reporter. It's great to have you both here. Thanks for joining us at the America Decides table. Pence's super PAC. You make a statement sometimes in politics by personnel. Personnel is policy, the old line. Scott Reed, Bob Dole's former campaign manager, Jeb Hensarling, former heavyweight close to Paul Ryan in the House, now out of Congress. Seems like a pretty serious super PAC. Shows me that they might have a lot of money potentially coming in.
I think money and momentum, Bob, and you're right. And if you look at the fact that, as you mentioned, that Scott Reed was the former head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, there's some avenues that he can bring into that super PAC, as you know, and also the fact that two of the main people running this super PAC come from governors who took on Trump, right? And in the last, you have Brian Kemp of Georgia, you have his former campaign manager being the executive director of this super PAC, and Mike Ritchie, who's the longtime comms guy for Larry Hogan out of Maryland, is now running comms for this shop. And also, I think it also shows that Pence is looking straight ahead to 2024.
But Pence has a long road ahead in this nomination fight. He has been taking on a candidate you've been covering closely, a potential candidate,
That's right.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. How do you see Pence in relation not only to Trump, but to DeSantis?
Well, Pence has come out against DeSantis when it comes to this fight with Disney, saying that he is overstepping a bit in terms of traditional conservative values and trying to control this corporation. And, in a way, Pence is creating a contrast on abortion being a bit more for a national abortion ban compared to DeSantis, who has not directly answered that question. But it's interesting. Finn brought up the people that are part of this PAC, and these are people. Bobby Sapro ran Brian Kemp's campaign in 2022, including that primary where he beat a Trump-backed candidate by 52 points. These are operatives that have taken on Trump in the modern age since 2020 and have won. And I do think that's notable when you look at Pence's path in the primary and, in a way, taking on Trump in his own style.
And Hogan's already told CBS News he's not running for the Republican nomination. And maybe this is a sign that Governor Kemp's not going to run for the nomination. Maybe a little bit of a implied blessing that Pence could be that non-Trump classic conservative candidate. Pence was telling us in Iowa that he wants to run as a traditional conservative. He said the same to the New York Times this week. Is there a path, though, for that movement traditional conservative in a populist age inside the Republican Party?
Well, it's a lot more difficult this cycle than it was in previous cycles. Obviously, Bob, he still has that. There's still that hardcore pro-Trump, 25 to 30% of the base at least, that will become an obstacle for him as he proceeds forward, right? And going back to January 6, 2021, and the backlash he got from the Trump supporters for that, I think that could be politically still an obstacle for him. However, as he could emerge as a consensus traditional conservative candidate, as maybe, and as we all know, this field could change a lot. A lot can happen between now.
And what's he taking shots on Trump on? Abortion.
Exactly.
And so who has Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? Let's listen to what Florida Governor DeSantis had to say today on abortion.
The legislature put it in. I signed the bill. I was proud to do it. He won't answer whether he would sign it or not.
Aaron, is this an attack we're going to see from DeSantis? Should he get in the race? He's going to take on Trump from the right. And then, Finn, I'd love to hear how you think the Trump people are responding to this kind of attack from DeSantis, or at least not an attack, but a comment, shall we say.
The issue of abortion is definitely something that DeSantis sees he can run to the right of Trump on, as well as when it comes to this conflict with Disney. But it's notable. I've been watching DeSantis press conferences all year when he does out of state some speeches. This is one of the most direct attacks DeSantis
You think
has
it's an
taken.
attack?
I do. He said, look, I'm proud I signed that abortion ban. Trump won't even answer whether he would do that in Florida. Trump was asked a very direct question: would you sign a 6-week abortion ban in Florida? Trump said, I'm looking at all the options. And
But is he saying Trump's name, Aaron? He's not saying Trump's name.
Well, to
yet.
me, you're right. That's right. But this does feel direct. It was a direct question. What do you think about Trump's comment? And he said, look, a Florida man, Florida resident, he won't even answer that question. And at least in terms of DeSantis standards, it does feel direct to me so far.
It's more of a contrast, more of an attack, but he's still not saying the T word. And I think that says a lot about where we are in the state of the race. Trump is getting flack from externally and internally for not being able to clearly
Does
lay
that
out
worry
his
the
position.
Trump people at all?
No. Why? Because of the Supreme Court picks that he chose while he was president, and behind the reason of the reversal of Roe v. Wade, right? And I think he continues to point to that, brandish his credentials, saying he's the most pro-life president there's ever been. And again, going back to SCOTUS picks, that's not going to change, at least not in the near future.
Real quick from both of you. Another big issue today, the Kentucky gubernatorial primary, especially for the Republicans. Who are you watching? What matters in 30 seconds each?
Daniel Cameron has been the front runner of this whole race. And Kelly Craft, who is down about 10 points to him in polls, got a last-minute endorsement from DeSantis, robocall last night. If she somehow pulls it off in a low-turnout election tomorrow, DeSantis has a lot to gain from that, because Cameron is also backed by former President Trump. And in this kind of quasi-war, that'll be interesting to watch.
It is definitely a proxy war. It reminds me of the midterms a little bit, right? When Trump was picking one side and the establishment was picking the other. In these primary fights, you're seeing the same thing now. One interesting note, Kelly Craft and her husband are big-time GOP donors. So even if she loses, I wonder who she's going to think about donating to.
Finn Gomez, Aaron Navarro, appreciate you stopping by. Philadelphia is also holding an election today. It's mayoral primary, and there's a special election in another part of the state that could have big implications on abortion access in the Keystone State. We'll break it all down. Coming up next, you're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Philadelphians are heading to the polls today to vote in a crowded Democratic field. 9 candidates running for mayor, but there are 5 top Democratic contenders: former city council members, a former city controller, and a business owner. The winner will face off against Republican David O. in the fall. He's unopposed for the Republican nomination. For more on this story, Democrat Malcolm Kenyatta joins us now. He is a Pennsylvania state representative who represents part of Philadelphia. Good to see you, State Representative. Thanks for taking the time. I grew up in Bucks County, just a little bit north of your district in the North Philadelphia suburbs. So I've been following Philly politics for years. I've been following your career, but I can't follow yet who you're endorsing or supporting in this primary race. So who are you backing tonight?
Listen, I'm backing 8 p.m. when this race is over, and whoever the winner is, we can get to actually the business that's at hand of addressing some really critical issues here in Philadelphia. Like so many communities across the country, we're dealing with an uptick in gun violence and what that means for communities being and feeling safe where they are. We have a real issue, Robert, with our schools that have closed because of asbestos, which is closed. I believe we're at 7 different major schools that have been closed down for the remainder of the school year, and possibly beyond. And I think we have a morale, crisis where, we've had a mayor for a number of years now who's made it clear he's ready to go. And I think that rubs off, on a city. We need a chief executive who is excited and ready to do this job, who has a vision for moving this city forward. And, as you had the graphic up, I think we have a very close race between, 5 pretty well-known Philadelphians.
And when you think about the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, is it moving in the direction of Philadelphia politics, moving towards progressive Democratic values, or is it moving more toward Josh Shapiro's, which he's progressive on many issues as well, but he's more of at least centrist in his tone and persona and his policies. Where do you see this all moving, State Representative?
Listen, I will tell you, I travel around the Commonwealth a lot. Pennsylvanians are common sense people, and you see it all across the Commonwealth that you have, conservative Democrats who win, self-described moderate Democrats who win, and a lot of energy in terms of progressives who are winning races as well. I know we're on the East Coast talking about Philadelphia, but there's a very interesting race for county executive out in Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is, where, very possibly one of my colleagues, Representative Sarah Innamorato, could become, I believe, the first woman and certainly, a progressive voice out in Allegheny County. And so I do think that there is a generational shift of millennials like myself and Gen Z really getting engaged in the process in ways that they haven't before. But I think across the board, Pennsylvanians are very common sense people who want to know that the people who represent them are focused on fixing the things that they are concerned about and making Pennsylvania the best place to live, raise a family, and ultimately retire.
I'll be tracking that race in Allegheny County for sure. Also, we're keeping a close eye on a special election being held tonight in Delaware County, Delco, that could determine control of the State House of Representatives, and that could have real implications on abortion rights and restrictions in the state. How do Democrats see that election?
I think that this is one that we're ultimately going to bring home. This is a Democratic, district. The special election has seen a lot of interest, including President Biden, who recently endorsed Heather, who's running in that race. And you're right, this is a make or break in terms of abortion access here in Pennsylvania. We have a quirky constitutional amendment, process, as you are well aware, where you have to pass a constitutional amendment in 2 successive legislative sessions. The governor does not have the ability to veto those constitutional amendments. Republicans passed last session in the dead of night a constitutional amendment to effectively ban abortion. Folks like Doug Mastriano and others who are leaders of the Republican Party here in Pennsylvania want to see that come back. And so we're going to do everything to make sure Heather wins. And we brought in a lot of big guns, including President Biden. So I think that we will get this over the finish line, but it's absolutely a make or break issue for the Commonwealth here.
Real quick, State Representative, you are a rising voice for progressive Democrats in Pennsylvania. Do you have any interest, any consideration of running for the Democratic Senate nomination in 2024 against Senator Bob Casey?
So I'm going to be supporting my friend and our Senator Bob Casey, but I have announced I'm going to be running for State Auditor General against Republican Tim DeFore next year. So I plan to be on the ballot, running with the President Biden, running with Senator Casey. But listen, we have a strong ticket of folks that we need to generate the type of enthusiasm and turnout. It's not just going to make sure President Biden wins, but that we send Senator Casey back and that we continue to do the type of common sense things that I think Pennsylvanians want to see done. And that's why we rejected, somebody like Doug Mastriano, who, if he runs, I'm telling you, he'll be the Republican nominee.
Well, many Democrats I know in Pennsylvania certainly want Senator Mastriano to run again. We'll see. Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.